My name is Gary Smith, and I'm a supervisor at a warehouse. I'm tall, broad-shouldered, and strong. Every couple of weeks, I shave my head, leaving it smooth, and I keep my goatee neatly trimmed. Right now, I'm sitting in the kitchen, waiting for my wife of 15 years, Karina, to walk through the door. She's dressed in her usual work attire, a simple business suit, and as always, she looks stunning. At 40, her beauty hasn't diminished in the slightest. Sure, she's gained a few pounds over the years, but to me, she's still an incredibly sexy woman. As she stepped into the doorway, she paused, seemingly ready to say something, but the words didn't come. Her eyes caught the serious look on my face, and concern shadowed her features. I gestured toward the chair across from me. She placed her briefcase and a new shopping bag on the table, then took a seat. A little about myself. I'm told that I'm often funny, charming, and witty. Someone who makes others feel loved and valued. However, I'm also someone who rarely shows emotion. Only one or two people in this world truly know the real me. One of them is my wife, and because of that, she understands my every reaction, even without me explaining it. Sharing my emotions isn't something I do. It's just not in my nature. Karina knows this. She knows my love for her is unwavering and that my word is as good as gold. So, for me, lunch dates are unusual territory. There's a group of people who call themselves swingers or who practice a certain lifestyle. They claim to share love, lust, and even suppress emotions while engaging in intimate relationships with others. I've heard it all before, but I'd argue that 99% of people are emotional beings who can't simply turn those feelings on and off. That said, I'm part of the 1%, someone whose emotional state is tightly controlled. Even so, Karina is the one person who's ever managed to glimpse the warmth beneath my icy exterior. She's the only one I've ever let into my heart. Karina, I began, cutting off anything she might have been about to say, you know me? You know I won't tolerate any lies or deception. Do you understand what I'm saying? Gary, she replied, her voice calm but tinged with confusion. I'm not entirely sure what this is about, but I will never lie to you. I never have, and you know that. Besides, I couldn't lie to you even if I tried. I'm terrible at it. But yes, I understand you. She reached across the table for my hand, and I took hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Good, I said, because some of your coworkers have reached out to me. They suggested you might be planning to utter those infamous words. Honey, we need to talk. And before you ask, no, don't be surprised. They only told me because they care about you. Her brow furrowed. At least 4 people from your office wrote to me, I continued. They mentioned your lunches with the new head of sales, Carl, your boss. Yes. I remember you telling me about him joining your company a couple of weeks ago. Gary, please, she interjected quickly. It was just a couple of lunches last week. 2 lunches, to be exact. We ate, had some coffee, and that was it. I didn't give it much thought. He knows I'm married. I told him all about you and your views on fidelity. He accepted that. No, he didn't give me any gifts or suggest meeting in private. And even if he had, the answer would have been no. Gary, listen to me. I appreciate my coworkers looking out for me, but I was planning to talk to you about this tonight. It's not at all what you're thinking. I leaned back, skeptical, and she immediately picked up on it. Gary, she said, her tone softening, I told you before, I'd die for you. I know how you think, and I understand that for you, there are no gray areas. That's part of what I love about you. And because I know you so well, I can assure you that nothing inappropriate happened. She hesitated for a moment, clearly working to compose herself before continuing. Now, I realize Carl isn't what he seemed. A few of the married men in my office warned me about him today. He's a snake, conniving and manipulative. But he's my boss and he's good at his job, so I can't exactly avoid him. I know I should have told you about those lunches sooner, and I regret not doing so. She reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. Look, she said, scrolling through pictures. Here's me and Carl at lunch last week. Yes, I started having lunch with him last week. Today he asked me again, but I turned him down. These pictures? They were taken at a public café. There were coworkers sitting nearby, as you can see. I wasn't hiding anything. As I studied the photos, I noticed the timestamps lined up with her lunch breaks. Everything she said checked out. Karina had always been consistent. She called me whenever she left the office late, asked me to pick her up when needed, and never smelled like anything but her perfume. She'd never given me a reason to doubt her words or loyalty. I exhaled deeply, letting go of the tension. "All right," I said. "Thank you for being honest. But in the future, I'd prefer to hear about things like this directly from you, not through our mutual friends. I don't mind if you have lunch with your boss. Just tell me about it." "I will," she promised. "Gary, you're the only man I love, the one I think about constantly. No one else excites me the way you do." With that, the tension dissolved. She stood up, grabbed her shopping bag, and pulled out a stunning red and black silk lingerie set, complete with stockings. Without saying a word, she began undressing in front of me, a small smile playing on her lips. My grin grew as I watched her. My wife is a vision of beauty. Her long black hair, medium-sized breasts, and shapely legs make her the envy of any man. It took her about 5 minutes to slip into the outfit. Once she was dressed, she turned slowly, letting me admire her. Karina walked over, sat on my lap, and kissed me. That kiss deepened, leading to soft, gentle lovemaking. We fell asleep in each other's arms, completely at peace. The next morning, Tuesday, we woke up wrapped in each other. "Gary, I love you forever," she whispered. "Never doubt me." "I won't," I replied, my voice full of sincerity. After lying there for a few moments, we got up, showered, and got dressed. Karina put on her suit, and I pulled on my work jeans, boots, and t-shirt. "Gary," she said, smiling as she adjusted her jacket, "I'm going to wear this set every day. It'll remind me of you and the night we shared." We kissed goodbye at the door and headed to our cars. Just before getting in, Karina turned to me and said, "Gary, why don't you join me for lunch at the café Carl and I went to? It's called the Copper Kettle, near my office. Be there around 1 o'clock. Okay? I think it's time you meet Carl." She smiled warmly as she spoke. I couldn't help but smile back. "Are you sure he'll be there?" I asked. "Oh, I'm certain. He'll be thrilled to meet you," she replied with an even bigger grin. "Love you, Gary. Don't be late." We drove off to work, and the morning flew by quickly. When lunchtime came, I made my way to the cafe Karina mentioned. The building was easy to spot, and I parked nearby. Inside, most customers were dressed in business suits or casual office attire. In contrast, I was in my work clothes. As I entered, I spotted Karina at a table, talking with a tall, slender man who wore a pricey suit and had his hair slicked back with way too much gel. He looked exactly like the kind of person you'd imagine, a slick, overconfident salesman. His back was turned to me, so he didn't notice my arrival, but my wife did. A few of Karina's colleagues who knew me from her office also saw me enter. Some paused their meals to see what might unfold. At that moment, I caught sight of my wife pushing back what appeared to be a pair of tickets. She looked up at me, then back at Carl, before standing and walking over to me. Wrapping an arm around my waist, she smiled and said, "Carl, this is my husband, Gary." "Gary, my love, I was just telling Carl here that you don't really approve of me having lunch with my boss. I also let him know that you wouldn't like him buying me tickets to a musical, especially when he doesn't have anyone else to go with. He was just about to ask me to go when you walked in. I told him the answer would be no, but that he could always ask you." Her smile was sweet, but there was a definite edge to her tone as she pulled me closer. Carl finally turned to face me, and before he could say a word, I placed a firm hand on his shoulder and squeezed hard. He winced and tried to back away, but I held him firmly in place, pushing him into his seat. Reaching into his jacket pocket, I found his phone and handed it to Karina. Leaning down so only Carl could hear, I whispered, "Listen carefully, Carl. You're not going to be having lunch with my wife anymore. That ends now. You need to understand that married women are off limits. As a supervisor, you should be protecting your employees' reputations, not jeopardizing them with something as inappropriate as lunch dates." I tightened my grip on his shoulder, causing him to flinch. "Here's how this is going to work. You'll stop inviting married or engaged women to lunch. Don't ask them, don't pressure them, don't even think about it. If you do, I promise you won't like the consequences. Trust me, I deal with people like you easily, and I have connections, let's just say some friends from Eastern Europe who owe me favors. If you hurt my wife in any way, whether emotionally or physically, those favors will be called in. And I guarantee they'll make sure you regret it. He whimpered, his bravado completely gone. Now you're going to pay your bill, leave quietly, and think very carefully about your next move. Most of the people here work in your building, and they've all seen you. They know exactly what you've been up to. As far as they're concerned, I haven't done anything to you. And your shoulder hurting? Let's just say it's from playing too much squash. Got it? I released him, and Carl slowly got to his feet, clearly shaken. He was shorter and much slimmer than me, and it was obvious he didn't stand a chance. He opened his mouth to say something, thought better of it, and then turned to Karina. What he did next was as stupid as it was predictable. Speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, Carl said, "Karina, I apologize for inviting you to these lunches without first consulting your husband. But I must say, I'm surprised that your husband's fragile ego can't handle the thought of you enjoying someone else's company. Many wives these days prefer to date other men instead of their husbands. Your husband seems so weak, following you here like this. Clearly, his ego has cost you your job." His tirade was cut short when Karina delivered a swift kick that sent him sprawling to the floor. His head hit the ground with a loud thud, and for a moment, he appeared to lose consciousness. The café erupted into applause, not for me, but for my wife. Couldn't have been prouder. The café owner, a man named Graham, walked over and glanced between Carl and us, still smiling from our impromptu victory. "Karina, consider this lunch on the house. That piece of trash won't be welcome here again. We've got cameras, but wouldn't you know it, there was a power outage just a few minutes ago. No one saw a thing. By the way, nice kick. Who taught you that?" Karina grinned and rested her arm on my shoulder. "My husband. A few years ago, he thought it'd be a good idea for me to learn self-defense." Graham nodded and instructed 2 employees to escort Carl out. "Take him to his car and leave him there. Use his keys, he drives an Audi. Don't let him back inside." With Carl taken care of, Karina and I returned to our table and finished our lunch, salmon, macaroni salad, and an expensive glass of wine Carl had ordered. As we were leaving, we were approached by an elegant, middle-aged woman who Karina immediately recognized as Mrs. Hawkins, the owner of her company. "Mrs. Hawkins," Karina said, a bit embarrassed. "I'm sorry you had to witness that." Mrs. Hawkins hugged her tightly and smiled. "Don't apologize, my dear. You handled it perfectly. I came here because I'd heard rumors about Carl's behavior, and I wanted to see for myself. I'm glad you stood your ground. Don't worry about him, he's already on his way out. As for you, you work for me now. Congratulations." Turning to me, she added, "Gary, take this wonderful woman home and take good care of her, but don't keep her too long. I'll need her back tomorrow morning." Hand in hand, Karina and I walked to our cars, eager to get home. That night, Karina was waiting for me in nothing but the red and black lingerie she knew I loved.